All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. This is Using Spring Data Collection to Drive Action, Leveraging Class for CQI. I'm Isabella. I'm here with our marketing team, helping to put this on and acting as host for our wonderful panelists today. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're from. And as a reminder, just wanted to let you know that we are recording this, and the recording of this will be available not tomorrow, but on Monday. I will send you an email so that you can have access to everything that you need. And I think we can move on to the next slide.
Isabella, I think you're screen sharing.
I forgot. Yeah, had a change of plans there. Okay, so our agenda today is we're going to be introducing each other and then jumping into using class as CQI, so a continuous quality improvement system, what you can do with your class data. We have Nicole Allen here with us, who's going to share her story from her district, and then at the end, you will have time for questions. As a reminder, this is being recorded, and on Monday, we're going to get you this recording along with the slides and whatever resources we share today. Keep in mind that the chat is open, so if you'd like to ask a question or interact, you can do that. Although we do recommend that if you have a question that you want answered by our host, to please use the Q&A box. It's just a better way for us to see your questions. So let's get started. So we want to hear who is with us today. So if you wouldn't mind sharing what your role is in the chat, we'd love to see, do we have mostly observers here? Do we have leaders, perhaps administrators, educators? I see a coordinator, director, lots of directors. Yeah, tons of directors, director of SEL. I see some coaches, some observers. Great. Some mentors. Yeah, we have a lot of center directors with us today. That's awesome. So I'm going to hand it over. This is Gina Gates. She's our regional director here at Teachstone. She works a lot with Florida and the southern regions. And we also have with us today Nicole Allen, who is a child care quality unit director for Workforce Solutions for Tarrant County. And they are going to be talking through classes CQI, as well as how they used it to get started in their system. So I'm going to turn it over to them now to continue introductions.
Nicole, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Nicole Allen. I am the Child Care Quality Unit Director in Tarrant County, which is a county that is located in the state of Texas. The two major cities that we support here is Fort Worth, Texas, and Arlington, Texas, home of the World Series champions, the Rangers. And I am just so happy to be here to talk about CQI and how we were able to implement the class culture in our community collaborations with a lot of our partners.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nicole. And hi, everybody. My name is Gina Gates. I'm the regional director here at Teachstone for the southeast portion of the country. I have been with Teachstone since 2016. Prior to coming to Teachstone, I was an educator myself and taught all the way from 2-year-olds all the way up to 1st and 2nd grade. I then later became an instructional coach where I learned of class and was coaching using the class tool. And joined Teachstone as a class trainer and now working as the regional director. I do support many programs in their implementation of class, getting started on the class journey and using class for CQI or continuous quality improvement. So it's a pleasure to be with all of you today, and it's a great happy Friday here. All right, so I'll go ahead and get started. And most of you that are here today are probably quite familiar with class and what class is. And oftentimes when we think about class, we think about the measurement or the observation component of class. But class is really much more than just an assessment tool. It really is a system that's implemented for continuous quality improvement. And when you think about that class tool and you think about continuous quality improvement, measurement or the observations is one component of that, but it's just a small component, and really it encompasses so many other aspects to this system. This image here really shows us what those three major components are in the focus, measure, and improve system of class. When we think about focus, this is really in helping everybody to understand and lay the foundation on what interactions are, what effective interactions look like in practice, and making sure that everybody and all stakeholders have an understanding and a focus on interactions. The second aspect of the system is really what most people think about when they think about class. So I hear programs say, we want to do class, and what they're really referring to is the observation component of the system. And although that component is really important, it is not the only component of the class system. So focusing and measuring are the two first parts of the system. I like to think about this third part is really in the meat and potatoes, as I like to say. So we have a focus and we've collected data and measurement, but what do we do with that data? That data is going to drive the improvement of those quality interactions that you looking for in your program. So making sure everybody has a focus of what interactions are, making sure that we're collecting data that's focused on those interactions, and then taking that data to improve those quality interactions that we look for in our program. I'm really excited to share this with you. For several years now, I've worked with programs, and they oftentimes call and say, we want to do class, or how do we do class? And really, for years, we've had a system in place, but we haven't clearly defined the steps on how to essentially do class in your program. And really, when people say they want to do class, I think what they're really referring to is they want to implement a system of continuous quality improvement, and they know that class can do that. We have an implementation guide that we've recently released. I think Isabella or Megan can drop that into the chat, can drop the link. It's implement.teachstone.com. And what you will find in our implementation guide, and it can be downloaded, is you're going to find 8 crucial steps that are involved, or really lay the foundation for how to implement a continuous quality improvement system. That first focus category is really in helping people build a class implementation team. So really identifying who those stakeholders are. When you look at the measurement component, this is when we're going to plan for the class data collection. We're going to communicate this with educators, and we're going to collect those class observations. And then we're going to share that data back with educators and also with stakeholders. And when you think about the improvement aspect, this is when we're really taking that data, we're leveraging the class data for improvement planning, we're helping educators adopt new practices, and we're building class coaching capacity during this aspect of the system. Today's focus in the webinar is we're going to focus on step number 6, which is going to be on leveraging class data for improvement planning. If you want to refer to any part of the implementation guide, we welcome you to go to the website. You can download the guide, and you can dig further into these other portions of the implementation guide. But for the purpose of today's webinar, we're going to focus on part 6, which is leveraging data. And you can go ahead and click to the next slide. All right, so as we shared, we're going to focus on leveraging data. Today, we're going to cover 3 parts of that, and that's really in how do we intentionally analyze and interpret the data. So after we've collected the data, what does the data tell us? We have to look at the data and analyze the data to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what our next steps are going to be. After we interpret and analyze the data, the second part of this is really in helping to set those clear and specific goals. And after we have those goals set, it's important to create an action plan, a detailed action plan that has specific steps on what we're going to do to continuously focus on and improve those interactions that we're having in our classrooms. Next slide. We skip one. Oh, one more. Okay, perfect. All right, so let's take a minute to understand all of the types of data that we have available to us. Right here. Okay, perfect. Thanks. So when we think about data, we have lots of different types of data, and class data is probably just one part or one aspect of the data that you collect in your programs. When we think about formal class assessments, this is when an observer goes into a classroom, collects observation and collects notes and observations and observes the classroom, and is going to assign a score between a 1 and a 7 on each of the dimensions of the class tool. Those scores indicate low evidence of interactions, mid-level evidence of the effective interactions, or a high level of interactions. And that is what it happens during a formal class assessment. But we also have informal class assessments that oftentimes can be done much more frequently than the formal assessments. Typically, formal assessments happen at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year, and they're quite lengthy. They take about 2 hours to conduct a full formal class assessment. When we do informal assessments, we can oftentimes do this in a much shorter amount of time, and we can also focus on a much smaller area or a more narrow focus. So for example, if you're working with a teacher and you're a coach, and you know that the teacher's really working on behavior management, in conducting a formal observation, you can go into a classroom and you can essentially observe just that one dimension. And it could be as short as 5 minutes. It could be as long as 15 or 20 minutes, but it's really in narrowing the focus on what exactly the teacher's behaviors or interactions are at that moment in time, and really in understanding different aspects of the class tool. So we talked about formal and we talked about informal assessments. But there is other data that programs do collect that may or may not be directly tied to the class tool. When you think about data that you have in your programs, do you oftentimes find that you collect surveys on teacher morale or teacher assessments? Do you have a way to collect anecdotal records on teachers' impressions of interactions? So we think about this other data, and all of this other data is also really important in this continuous quality improvement system. So we want to make sure that we're not excluding any of the data that we're collecting, but that we're using all types of data to inform our progress or our path forward. Next slide. All right. So let's spend a little bit of time on this first aspect. I've collected my data. I've already conducted my class observation, and now it's time to analyze and interpret the data. What is the data telling us? It's really important that we spend time in analyzing the data and identifying the strengths. We want to make sure that we are not fixated on the negatives, but really in highlighting the positives. And that's one of the things that I immediately was drawn to in class, is the aspect of very strength-based approach. We want to make sure that teachers have a great understanding of what is going really well and what interactions are really effective in a classroom. When you're identifying and unpacking those strengths, it's important to look for patterns and trends. Are there particular times of the day that you see that the interactions are more effective? Maybe it's a particular content area or a particular subject matter that the teacher's focused on that really seems to have really effective interactions during that time. So when you're unpacking the strengths and analyzing the data, it's important that you're looking for these trends. You also want to see if it's a trend with just one particular educator, or is this something that you're seeing across several different educators or classrooms? The other thing to keep in mind is that when you hone in on the positives, you're going to help to identify areas where we can make these continued improvements. We know that the class dimensions and interactions are interconnected. So we know that improving interactions in one area or one dimension also helps impact interactions within another dimension. So how can you apply the strengths in one area to also help support the improvement of interactions in other areas? Next slide. All right, so we've analyzed the data. We know what our data is telling us. That's step one. The next step is we need to set our goals, setting clear goals and defining these goals collaboratively. I remember when I was coaching, this was a really important part of the coaching cycle, was sitting down with educators and making sure that there was buy-in and making sure that there was a shared ownership of what the goals were. It's not about me as a coach going in and telling the teachers or the educators what their scores are and determining their goals for them. It's really important that we include all stakeholders in the identification and setting of these goals collaboratively. It also helps to foster a culture of that shared ownership. And as an educator, I'm much more likely to want to work towards and strive for that goal if I have had some say in what that goal is and how to get there. We also want to make sure that the goals are specific. We want to make sure that they're achievable and that they're attainable by educators. We know that research has shown us that even just small improvements in class scores can lead to great benefits for children. Yes, it would be awesome if we saw teachers jump from a 2 to a 7 over the course of the year. However, that's not necessarily needed in order to make sure that we have improvements for children. So even small incremental improvements or increases in those class scores are going to lead to benefits for the children. And it also helps to lay the foundation for growth. So really getting specific and really having that map of where we're going and how to get there. And it's also important that as we set these goals, we create milestones to celebrate. So yes, the end game is great, but those small wins along the way, it's important to celebrate those wins. And it's important to recognize the progress, and it's also important to recognize the intentionality in moving towards those goals. So maybe I didn't quite get there, but I'm trying really hard. So we want to recognize that educators are striving to get to those goals, and we want to celebrate those attempts as well. All right, next slide. All right, so as we're setting goals, there are some key questions that are really, really going to help in identifying and setting goals. Nicole, I'm going to ask you a couple questions here because I know that when you're implementing CQI, that you oftentimes, in setting those goals, need to ask yourself some key questions. Can you give me an example of, what you would list as some of the results that you want to see after providing professional development to your educators?
Absolutely. So especially when as you're going through your CQI process, and after implementing the professional development, you would love to, I'd love to be able to go back and see those goals being implemented, those action items being implemented. And then finding the opportunity if there were suggestions that were made that didn't, that the goals are not being met, that would be the opportunity to have some conversations about how can we, get to that goal, or if we need to adjust it based on whatever is happening with that educator.
I'm so glad you said that, Nicole, because we're going to talk about that in a minute about being flexible with these goals. Because although we want to make sure that we're consistent, it's also important to have flexibility with our goals. If we need to change them, if we need to adjust, are we meeting those goals, right? So what are we doing to continuously check to see that we're striving for those goals, and if we need to adjust them, that it's important that we have the flexibility to do so. Another question that I want to go ahead and ask you, and next slide, is how do you know that you've achieved those results? And you kind of alluded to this a little bit in your last response, but within your program, can you give an example of how you would know that you've achieved those results?
Well, first, it definitely is looking at the data, measuring the outcomes of assessments from point A to point B, and if scores have gotten higher, then we know that some of those goals have been achieved, and those results have been successful. So it's always going back to that data that's really going to show us if what we have set in stone is actually working.
Awesome. Awesome. Yes. And the last question I want to ask you is, what would incremental progress toward those results look like? So can you give us an example of something that would look like an incremental progress toward the goal within your program?
Yeah, so that I think that is the best part for me with CQI is the incremental progress. You can't go from crawling to running. Doing those checkpoints is very important when really embedding a CQI culture inside of your program. So for me, it's doing those one-on-one, those check-ins with those coaching and mentoring practices. That's going to show that celebrating the small successes along the way. To me, is what makes us so successful in achieving our overall goals.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that is so important, that oftentimes we get fixated with the end result, that we don't spend the time celebrating those small wins. And I love that you said that, because any little step towards that path needs to be celebrated along the way. And I think that also helps to keep the momentum going and keep the buy-in.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, Nicole.
You're welcome.
All righty, so we've got that goal setting, and we think about these reflection activities. And I think it's really important to ask yourself these questions as you're setting the goals. Let's go on to the last part of this section, which is in developing detailed action plans. So we've analyzed the data, we've set the goals. Our last step is, what are we going to do in order to achieve those goals? So this is the point in time where we have to really make sure that we're narrowing our focus. And I want to spend a little time on that. When I say narrowing our focus, I want to share an example. When I was coaching an educator several years ago, instructional support was an area that she was really struggling in. She said, I really want to spend some time on instructional support. Okay, that's a wonderful area to start, and that's a really great starting point. But as we think about instructional support, and we know that there's 3 domains in instructional support and a lot of 3 dimensions and a lot of indicators and behavioral markers. Really, in narrowing that focus is really important to hone in on what exactly within instructional support do we want to focus on. Maybe it's just concept development for the time being. Maybe it's just in asking those how and why questions. So rather than say instructional support is my focus, we want to make sure that we're getting really, really specific and detailed with these action plans. We have an action plan template that we have highlighted here. This is actually located in our implementation guide. You can download this along with many other templates that we have provided for you. This is a really great, easy to use tool that a teacher and a coach can sit down together and really come up with a really clear action plan on what they're going to do to achieve those goals. We also want to make sure that we monitor consistently and frequently. What are we going to do in order to check that we are making progress toward those goals? And so, although we want to be consistent, we also want to make sure that we're flexible in that action plan, because we don't want to be so rigid that we don't have the ability to change or to pivot when needed. So as we make progress, or if things are working or things are not working, we can easily say, let's try something different, or let's try something new. All right, next slide. All right, so just to recap, we talked a lot about intentionally analyzing and interpreting data. That's really in identifying and unpacking those strengths, recognizing momentum for growth. We talked about setting clear and specific goals and making sure that we define goals collaboratively and we get really specific with our goals. And we also talked about developing detailed action plans, making sure that we're setting priorities and monitoring and adjusting the focus areas for these plans. In the next portion of the webinar, we are going to hear a little bit more from Nicole on her CQI experience in her program. And so at this time, I'm going to go ahead, Nicole, and turn it over to you so that you can tell us about your program and some more specifics on how this worked.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Gina. And again, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak on CQI as a practice, and really how you can create a CQI as a community culture in utilizing class. So next slide. So I'd like to take a moment to really kind of explain the system in the state of Texas. So our QRIS system, or Quality Rating Improvement System in the state of Texas, is called Texas Rising Star. We utilize Texas Rising Star as, of course, our Quality Rating Improvement System, but the difference that is very unique for Texas is that our child care subsidy, CCDBG dollars, is given to the Texas Workforce Commission, and they distribute the dollars out to 28 local workforce development boards, who are each responsible for implementing our quality system and quality improvement activities, and of course, giving vouchers to families so children can get to childcare. I sit at number 5, which is the Tarrant County Workforce Development Board. And in our Workforce Development Board, we decided to utilize class as more of a community approach to really work on how we can show quality at a community level. We utilize the definition of CQI within our system of Texas Rising Star. So that's kind of that's the driver of how we got to our community collaborative. Next slide. Okay, so within our system, we decided when we first started this project, we had a lot of different ideas of what quality was and what quality was not. And we have a lot of different, we're very lucky in my area that we have a lot of different organizations that have really touted how quality education for in early childhood is paramount. But we noticed that inside of our system, we had mentors and coaches coming in and out of our facilities and with our providers and giving them mixed messages that were really confusing our educators and really confusing our directors. So we went through a system approach of how can we all get together, get on the same page, speaking the same language to ensure that our messaging is getting clear to our teachers. So that way our interactions are being, our scores are getting higher. So the project, we worked in conjunction with SMU, which is a research entity, a university here in Texas. And the collaboration, the results where we worked with a various amount of classrooms over and impacted about 2,000 children in Tarrant County, which was really important, as you can imagine. It's a big, we cover a huge geographical location in Tarrant County, in Texas. So it was extremely important for us to make sure that we implemented this correctly. We did a mentors and coaches. We worked with them because, like we were speaking before, and what Gina has highlighted, that CQI process is not successful unless the mentors and the coaches are equipped in order to understand how to support their teachers, their educators, and how to actually do some SMART goals and attainable, achievable action items. And what we found was that we scored well above the quality threshold in emotional support, and we achieved really strong gains from our fall and our spring, which was really important for us to show the data behind the work that we were doing. So next slide. So the professional learning community, this is the part where I get so excited about the work that we did, because this is where we were able to get into the trenches with our mentors and our coaches to really explain to them what the importance of looking at data and how that data drives your mentoring practices. In my area, especially for me, I am very passionate on building the coaches and the mentors toolbox. I believe that you're only successful as the tools that you are given. So I really push our programs, not just in the programs that I support, but also our community programs, to ensure that everything that we do is done with intentionality as relates to our coaches and our mentors, because that's going to trickle down into our classrooms, since they are the trusted body that comes in and works with them every day. So first, we held monthly meetings. We went over the class scores. We really started to understand class. We ensured that every single mentor, whether you are an observer or not, becomes reliable in class. I myself got reliable in class just so I could understand the tool and the language, because it is a little different from our Texas Rising Star system. So the first thing we all had to do was get on the same page as it relates to what we wanted to do. We got educated from the same trainers, and then we were able to start implementing this practice. We went into reviewing the data. So each individual organization received their scores, and they had the opportunity to work in their own organization amongst their coworkers to really analyze their scores, analyze what they were seeing, and really work together on how they can get a forward action plan. Then we also received an overarching training from everyone in the community. And so we all, again, like I said, getting on the same page was so important for us to ensure that we were all speaking the same language. So both mentors and leadership. So it was the mentors and the leaders, all the way up to the CEOs of these organizations that were trained on how to review class data. And then, as you can imagine, this takes a lot of trust building that had to happen for us to share our class scores amongst the organizations, create MOUs, data sharing agreements, so we can gain a better insight into what our community looked like. We really utilized this to do a really good landscape study on teacher-child interactions in our community facilities. After that, we started implementing our CQI. So that's where the mentors took their time to analyze their own scores per their classrooms. They did a lot of SMART goal training, and then we went into full implementation of mentoring with the class scores. So this, I have, synthesized this into, some 3 buckets, but the scope of this was over a duration of about 3 years. So we were able to get to us all fully implementing class. So next slide. So to comparing the measures, like I said, we do not utilize class as a state as our quality rating system. Like I said, we all in Texas have the 28 different local workforce boards are able to implement additional overlays to enhance quality based on what we feel our community needs. So we decided in Tarrant County that class supports our category 2 beautifully. So you can see on one part of the slide, TRS is a whole program assessment. The certification categories we have 4 certification categories. And as you can see, number 2, teacher-child interactions is 40% of our entire overall star rating. So it was just a no-brainer for us that class would be able to come in to support category 2 because we believe that teacher-child interactions that is quality. If we have strong teacher-child interactions, we're going to have stronger child outcomes. So class really helped us shine a light on what our interactions were doing, how we were moving our interactions, how we were going from setting, goals, our incremental progress, and how we were able to maintain and actually gain higher scores for teacher-child interactions utilizing class. Mentors, they were able to use their data with class and paired with their TRS category 2 results and really set intentional goals. Like Gina was explaining, that utilizing all of your assessments that you use in your classrooms and in your programs is so important because you really get to see a lot what is really happening inside of the classroom. Using just one tool only gives you a one-sided observation inside of what's going on inside of your classroom. If you're using other assessments, putting all of that into one goal set is really important and really smart. Teachers and directors who choose to be assessed, they're also taught from their scores and how they can, when the mentor is not in the center, when they haven't done their monthly visit, the teachers and the directors both can actually utilize class as well. So to help and support in their classroom. So at the end of the day, everybody wins when you use both assessments and really try to work on the intentionality of supporting your classrooms. Next slide. So these are our CQI success stories. Our local level system changes were surprising. We went into this as an idea, like, what if we did this? What would happen? Kind of like an experiment. And we found that the collaboration between our community organizations was strengthened, and it is still intact today. This is a culture that we were able to create that as outlasted leadership, staff changes, even COVID. We were very fortunate to create this process before the pandemic, and we just really were able to just kind of roll with the punches with our system. Mentors across organizations now have a networking system. So they're able to call each other at any given time to ask about a specific program that they're both supporting and get aligned before they even go into that classroom to make sure that they're both utilizing the same language to not confuse our teachers. We have aligned practices and we have cross-training to support our providers. So we do a lot of training with our programs. We bring them all in the same room and we all speak together, speaking the same language. We are really able to inform leadership. I get informed of potential gaps in real time because I'm not only speaking to the mentors that work in our facilities, I'm speaking with the leadership from the other organizations we're all coming together to make sure that we are continuously doing our quality improvement in real time. And our practices are natural and organic to our community. So just last week, I was in a meeting with a lot of leaders, a lot of CEOs of our organization, and we were talking about an issue that came up, and we were able to immediately start doing CQI practices and get that information to the supervisors and the managers, and we were able to implement a new practice immediately. The organization insights, we were able to find that SMART goals were been very helpful. And we developed a tiered system on-site coaching, remote coaching, blended the method, and we focused on the duration and frequency of coaching, our PD in the fall, and we coach the same elements in the spring. So our professional development for our cohort of mentors and coaches is all driven based on our class scores that we all receive as a collective. Next slide.
Before we continue, I'd love to just highlight a couple questions that have related to some things you've said.
Okay.
So asked that you mentioned fall and spring data. Are these formal observations or observations within your agencies? They said that they currently alternate every 2 years with Eckers in class. Seeing the data with the same year would be so useful.
Yeah, so we actually, the partnership that we created with SMU Core is still intact. So we have outside observers that come in and observe all of our facilities. We do not do our own observations, and that's just to keep everything up and out of our mentor scope. They get the data, and then they start doing the education component for our programs. And this is fall and spring every year.
Cool. And then we had a question about just celebrating the wins along the way, as we discussed at the beginning of the presentation. Could you give some examples of how you celebrate those small wins as you're building the system?
Yes, so what we do in our Texas Rising Star system, our mentors are they are required to go into their programs monthly. So we are constantly in communication with our programs, and so the programs that are participants in class, they get their information and they know their data. If they do increases from fall to spring, this is tied to an incentive. So we know that our educators right now are struggling. We're trying to pay them, a livable wage. Those are the big things that we have to do for our industry. And so we've embedded an incentive for them. So if their scores increase, they get an increase. And then also, again, that is an organic space to push our rating system up because TRS is in there as well. And we do yearly check-ins with them.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds great. And then we have one more clarification that somebody wanted, just the difference between on-site coaching, remote coaching, and blend method.
Sure. So on-site coaching, of course, is when you go into the facility and you're, one-on-one with the teacher and you're in the classroom doing modeling and you're doing that one-on-one support. Remote coaching is we have the ability to go utilize technology because technology is great. And we found during the pandemic, we were able to kind of shift our practices utilizing Teachstone in class as well and do remote access into the centers, doing videos, recording things, and having those Zoom conversations with our directors because we don't want to disrupt the program. We don't want the directors and the teachers to feel like they have to stop everything that they're doing to help us, especially when there's a lot of things that are happening inside of the centers. And a hybrid approach is we really use that when we're doing a group PD where we're able to have people in the room, but also if you can't come to the center or you can't come to the location, you can Zoom in and get your PD from that as well.
Well, great. Thank you for answering those. I just want to remind everybody that the chat is open and the Q&A box is open, so we'll move on. But if you have other questions, we'd love to get those answered for you today. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine.
I went a little too fast. Is this the right one?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's perfect. It's technology. So as I mentioned, CQI in class is a culture in my community. And we are constantly speaking with each other. We are constantly in communication with all of our organizations. And so Texas is going through a full QRS system change. And so as you can imagine, there's a lot of policies and processes and things that are going on that we need to adjust and get a lot of providers and educators educated on our new system quickly. With that being said, we had to reach out yet again to our community partners to carry the heavy load with us. And of course, they were ready for the challenge. So we have gone to serving maybe about 12% of the facilities that we have bigger contracts with subsidy with, to serving 100% of our providers need to be on our quality rating improvement system. And that is a huge move to get all of these programs up to quality within a limited amount of time. So the first thing that we did was say, we called out all of our friends and said, hey, we need help. We have a lot of policies that are being pushed down that we have got to get educated on. And first and foremost, we would love for you to be a part of this with us. And can we educate you on our new processes? So we pulled all of our mentor leadership in the room. The PLC that we created came in the room, and we all started going through our Texas Rising Star system yet again for them to understand. Luckily, we continuously doing class along the way. So really everyone is just they're very educated on what quality looks like in our system. Collaboration is where we really started to find our community gaps. With our new policies, with the new procedures, and Texas Rising Star being the driver of quality, where are our gaps and how can our collaborative help to fill those in? And I'm so happy to report that we have been able to really identify some really big organizational gaps that we've been able to fill. And then the connection, we created again a network of support. So the leadership that has changed from the beginning of this process to now, we're able to see why we are so passionate about keeping ourselves connected. They're seeing why it's so important, and we're able to retain. The biggest thing that we've been able to do thus far with this community collaborative is retain our providers, retain our teachers, retain a lot of the things, because they see that they have a network of support. So not just our teachers, not just our directors, but our mentors, our coaches, and our leadership, all the way up to our organizations, have a full network of support that is tied to how we have implemented continuous quality improvement, utilizing our class scores. I think next slide. I think I'm done. So with that, I will stop. And if there's any more questions, I'm more than happy to answer.
Yeah, so we have plenty of time for questions. If you have anything else you want to add or ask, feel free to drop it in the chat now. And I just want to remind everyone that we will be sending this recording on Monday, along with the resources, the guide that we dropped in the links earlier. So feel free to ask any other questions now. Gina, do you have anything else to add for today?
I just wanted to say, Nicole, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. It is really exciting to hear about the success that your program has had in implementing this CQI system. And I think that it's great to see it in action, right? So theoretically, we hear oftentimes, well, you could try this or you could do this, and the theories of or plans. But to really hear of a program that has actually done it, has walked the walk, and the successes that you've had, I think is just amazing to hear. I am curious, I did have one question. When this was first being rolled out, because I'm very inquisitive, and I will be honest, this is my first time really hearing the detailed version of your story, because I've heard the success story, but have not heard all the details around it. When this was first rolled out, I'm very curious what the response was from educators, because I think oftentimes what we see in the field is that educators have this sense of there's one more thing that they have to do. Somebody's coming in to watch me and tell me all of the things that I'm doing wrong. And really, when we're implementing CQI, you and I both know that it's really about improvement and providing supports to educators. But I don't know if it's necessarily always received that way. So I'm curious, how was it received by your educators in your program? And what did you do or say? Yeah, I'm super curious about that.
Oh, well, you hit the nail on the head, Gina. It definitely was rough in the beginning because it is yet another thing. And they were like, well, I do Texas Rising Star. Aren't you Texas Rising Star? What do you mean this new assessment? Right. So, and that was the driver to make it work, because they really did not understand and see the vision. But it wasn't just our teachers. Of course, the gateway into any program is the directors and the owners. So we had to get them to understand. And our mentors, everyone pushed back The opposition was absolutely there. But I think that's the part of CQI that is so fun, right? And you go from a mess of what are we going to do to doing these incremental changes to show along the way what the goal and the mission can be and the outcome could be. And that's why it was so important for all of us to get reliable and go through the training so we could make sure that we were speaking the right language, and anyone that was asking, we all were speaking saying the same things and utilizing the same language. And even when we're speaking to other workforce development boards, and even speaking with our state entity and saying, why are we doing this, and saying, well, this is the reason why. If you can utilize another assessment that only is focused on one category, but it influences everything else, look at how beautiful the retention in our star rating is. Look at how beautiful it is. And teacher child, it's not, we didn't want to drill it down to a star. It needs to be a culture that changes in the system. If the stars go away, are you still having strong teacher child interactions? That's the goal.
Yeah.
But yeah. It was a struggle.
I bet it is, but I love that you said that, because I think oftentimes we get fixated on this score, on this number, right? And it's really the score or the number is the data, but it's not about that number, right? It's really about the culture of understanding the importance of teacher-child interactions and understanding why it's so important to focus and understand how improving those teacher-child interactions really impacts the success of the children in your program. And I think more than that number, it's establishing that culture of continuous improvement, that I'm going to continuously strive to get better no matter how long I've been doing this. There's always room for growth, right? And there's always room to get better. And, it's I think with CQI, it's just something that it really helps to establish that it's not about the numbers, and it's really about the culture and the climate, and making sure that everybody, all stakeholders, have that shared value and that shared culture.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I want to jump in. We have a few more questions. I wanted to ask the follow-up first, like, what would you recommend to directors who are maybe in those beginning stages? You said it was a mess to get started and the buy-in was bad. Was there, or not bad, but it was rough at the beginning. How would you recommend, like, what would you do differently looking back to try to get that start a little smoother? Like, do you think there's anything that you can do, or is it just part of the process and you have to trust the process to get there?
Yeah, I think, continuous quality improvement is trusting the process, right? So it's definitely, you can't, foresee every bump in the road as you go along. So what I would do differently, I think, it would be putting the directors in the training with us. I think that was one of those spaces where it was the leadership and the group outside of the system that came in and said, this is what we're going to do. So next time I would definitely include more owners and directors to come into the fold of the conversation and decision making. I think that was the missed opportunity that I can see. And then of course, with continuous quality improvement, you learn your gaps. So now when we try to implement other projects in the community, directors are definitely they're at the table with us, and they're thought partners with us now.
Yeah, that's awesome. Somebody asked if Texas is using the infant and toddler class instruments. Could you just clarify that?
Yeah, well, we are. But the state of Texas, like I said, it is a local driven system. So there's pockets of us in the state of Texas that are utilizing class in the tool. But as the state, no, they are not using it. Texas Rising Star is our assessment.
Great. Any other questions? Gina, in the chat, I see there's a question specifically for you about My Teachdown. Do you see that?
I'm sorry, I don't have the chat.
You're good.
Can you read me the question, Isabella?
This may be more specific to the person, and we may just have to reach out to you. But we purchased My Teachdown. We have one of our administrators asking if there's any way to grow this data system in the future to have an area where informal assessments can be entered into the system. They would like to keep the data separate for formal and informal.
Yes, so the great news, we are actually in the process of developing an informal component to My Teachstone that you will have the ability to enter informal data. We can definitely have a further conversation. Isabella, can you grab the name and can you drop your email in the chat? And that way I can reach out to you and we can chat further on more specifics.
Yes, we can. I'll tell them.
Perfect.
Yeah, we're good.
Yes, the short answer is yes. It is in the planning stages right now, in the development stages, I should say.
Great, thank you. Any other questions before we finish up? We're about at time. We're so grateful for everybody attending today and the great questions that we received. And of course, for Nicole Allen for joining to share this story, and Gina, as always, for leading from Teachstone's end. Yeah, it's always great, I think, to have people like Gina's expertise on the product, and Gina has just a wealth of wisdom when it comes to class, but having Nicole here to share what it looks like in practice and what these success stories look like, I think is so important. So we're all glad that you're here, and hopefully this will be helpful, and you'll be able to use this resource in your data planning and using the data to plan for next year.
Thank
And
you, everybody.
if you have questions about my Teachstone, I think we can probably add something in the email that we send out on Monday. If you want to know more about that, we'll put you in touch with the right people.
Isabella, can you share the next slide so people know how to get in touch with those questions?
Yes. Almost forgot. How can I forget? So Gina Gates and Nicole Allen's information is here. And if you have questions about today's session, you want to get started on your next steps, scanning the QR code will take you to a form to get in touch. We'll also be sending you that link in our email that you'll be receiving on Monday. So we have plenty of resources that we'll be sending your way. So if you joined us late today and you didn't get the download that we shared, that as well as all the other resources mentioned are going to be shared in that email. And I think, yeah, Megan also shared the link that is linked with the QR code in the chat. So if you want to get started now, it is there in the chat for you. And we'll leave that up for another minute. And again, thank you. We all hope you have a really great weekend. Happy Friday, everyone. And as always, feel free to reach out using the form that we will be sending you on Monday or in the chat now.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend. Happy Friday.